Kate Fairman.
Fairman.
Fairman. I'm going to get that right.
Fairman.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Deputy President.
Thank you, Deputy President.
I rise to speak on the Western Sydney and Aerotropolis Authority Bill, which is a bill for an act to constitute and confer functions on the Western City and Aerotropolis Authority. This bill establishes a new government agency which will perform a master planning role for the development of not only the precinct around the Western Sydney Airport, but potentially a vast area of Western Sydney. The Minister for Western Sydney has described the Western Sydney Aerotropolis, which includes the new Western Sydney Airport, as being a global employment centre, attracting international investment and delivering jobs, education opportunities and enhanced livability for all Western Sydney residents. The bill before us stems from a deal struck between the then Turnbull government and the Berejiklian government and 8 Western Sydney councils on the 4th of March 2018. The 8 councils are Blue Mountains, Camden, Campbelltown, Fairfield, Hawkesbury, Liverpool, Penrith and Wallandilly. The agreement reached was the Western Sydney City deal, which included a north-south rail link from St Mary's to Badgerys Creek, Aerotropolis via Western Sydney Airport, an investment attraction office to attract investment to the Western Parkland City, new planning regime for Western Sydney to cut development costs and boost housing supply, a $150 million Western Parkland City livability program to deliver community facilities, new STEM-focused education facilities to train skilled workers needed for the Aerotropolis, a plan to embed smart digital technology in the Western City, a world-class Aerotropolis, including Commonwealth-owned land at North Bringelly, according to the Minister's media release on the 4th of March 2018. The Minister said during his second reading speech that over the next 20 years, the 8 council areas will grow by more than 500,000 residents to create a city with a population of more than 1.5 million people. This is bigger than the current size of Adelaide, but existing residents of the Western City do not have access to the jobs that they need. The Greater Sydney Region Plan shows that just 49% of Western City residents live and work locally, compared to 91% of the east of the city. A research report released in June this year by Ian Watson, who is a visiting fellow at the Social Policy Research Centre and the University of New South Wales for the Jobs for Western Sydney Working Group, however, found that, contrary to the claims of a jobs bonanza, only 120 construction jobs and 800 airport jobs would be targeted to Western Sydney workers in the first stages of the Western Sydney Airport construction. The overall jobs claim, such as 8,700 aviation jobs by 2031, are also vastly exaggerated, and that comparable airports, such as Adelaide, support only 1,600 aviation jobs. Proposals for an adjacent business park and also for an Aerotropolis appear unrealistic. Close examination of these proposals and a real-world comparison with a number of other business parks in Sydney shows that the job estimates are inflated. The Jobs for Western Sydney Working Group report also states that 15,000 manufacturing jobs between 2006 and 2016 were lost in the West, and large numbers of jobs were lost as a result of the savage cutbacks by the New South Wales government in the public rail system. If this government was serious about jobs, it would not continue to cut public sector jobs and rip the guts out of our public TAFE system, for example, Mr Deputy President. Many other airports around the world that are surrounded by economically productive areas, in other words, with the associated jobs that the government keeps spruiking, are as a result of another competing airport closing. But here in Sydney, we have governments obsessed with privatisation and selling off our public assets, including Sydney Airport, of course, years ago. Even if relocating Sydney Airport was a good idea, it is simply not feasible because of the 99-year lease enjoyed by Sydney Airport Corporation. While there's no doubt that new infrastructure projects, including the Badgerys Creek Airport, will provide more jobs in the area, it's right to continue to question the modelling for the government's job figures, considering so much is resting on them. The Greens have been warning for many years that building the Western Sydney Airport will be a massive boon to developers at the expense of the livability of surrounding areas and general amenity for many Western Sydney residents. This airport will have no noise curfew. Apparently what's good for the people of the inner west of Sydney and the eastern suburbs is not good for the people of Western Sydney. Residents of Western Sydney will be forced to cope with high levels of noise and increasing air pollution, as well as increased traffic congestion.
That's not right.
To top it off, the government continues to spruik over inflated figures to help sell this proposal to the community, and in particular to pressure the people of Western Sydney and the local councils to support the airport. This bill is another bonanza for the government's mates in development and infrastructure companies, but the government's record on managing contracts with these companies and getting value for money for the people of New South Wales is there for all to see. Anyone walking down George Street or Devonshire Street or driving along the M4 or Anzac Parade or indeed all over Sydney, anywhere, can see construction sites that have outstayed their welcome and infrastructure projects which have blown out by hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars, Mr Deputy President. Exactly, the South East Rail Link is what we're talking about, Anzac Parade. Of course, we're talking about WestConnex when we talk about billions of dollars.
Order.
We're talking about WestConnex. And here we have the same minister responsible asking us to put our faith in a massive new planning authority that will be all about deals with the big end of town at the expense of genuine community involvement in planning decisions that affect them. Mr Deputy President, the Greens won't be supporting this bill. Let's remember that Sydney Airport Corporation ultimately decided to exercise its right of refusal to take on the project of building Badgerys Creek Airport because it was too risky. So the government has taken this on and has made the decision to sell it soon after completion in 2026. Given this government's record, though, on completion dates for major infrastructure projects, Mr Deputy President, this will probably blow out to maybe beyond 2030. And we know 2050, more like it says the Honourable Shaquette Musselman, possibly. And it's not just the airport that will be privatised. The government's media release from 4th of March 2018 for the Western Sydney City deal states the Turnbull and Berejiklian governments have jointly committed to the first stage of the North-South rail link from St Mary's to Badgerys Creek, Aerotropolis via Western Sydney Airport. The Turnbull and Berejiklian governments have a joint objective of having rail connected to the Western Sydney Airport in time for the opening of the airport. A market-sounding process will test private sector interest in station developments and explore innovative financing solutions. We've seen the outcome of Sydney Airport Corporation controlling public transport options to the airport so it can reap the financial benefits. That's probably an innovative financing solution as well. Never mind the congestion, never mind the cost. Actually, I'll acknowledge the interjection by the Honourable Dr Peter Phelps because, yes, which government did that? It was a Labor government, but the Liberal government is intent on following the Labor government down that path. With, well, we've got the media release here talking about private sector interests in station developments. Clearly the rail link will be privatised. We've seen contracts that exclude...
I might stop the conversation across the chamber and go through the chair. Thank you.
Apologies, Mr Deputy President. We've seen contracts that exclude buses from providing direct airport links from the CBD to the airport. We've seen exorbitant train fares that drive people to catch taxis or Ubers together to save money. We've probably all experienced the frustration of being stuck in traffic jams about to miss our flight.
Nope, I take the train.
Order.
The object of the Act is to encourage the economic growth and development of the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and the rest of the Western City in particular. At D, by promoting development that accords with best practice environmental and planning standards, is environmentally sustainable and applies innovative environmental building and public domain design. Western Sydney is set to absorb 60% of the overall population growth in the Greater Sydney area over the next 18 years, which accounts for over 1 million people, with most 70% of these people being added to existing suburbs. With planned expansion of existing suburbs in Western Sydney, an additional 400,000 homes will be constructed in the WESROC, Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, area to accommodate this population boom. One of the biggest environmental challenges facing Western Sydney residents is the severe lack of green space and the loss of Cumberland Plain woodland, and unfortunately the government's growth obsession in Western Sydney is seeing the loss of this bushland at an alarming rate. The Cumberland Plain is home to vital natural ecosystems and agricultural industry that is at serious threat from poorly planned expansions to existing suburbs. The peri-urban agricultural industry of the Cumberland Plains contributes $1.5 billion to the economy per annum and is further threatened by decreasing air quality from vehicles and additional land clearing. Commitments from earlier governments to preserve the Western Sydney Greenbelt have been seriously compromised by the current New South Wales government's obsession with selling off more land to developers than is being acquired for reservation and conservation. I'd like to ask the Minister, are there any, or the Parliamentary Secretary, are there any requirements in this bill or associated instruments that will require the authority to protect Cumberland Plain woodland and other ecological communities as part of the growth and development of the Western Sydney Aerotropolis and the rest of the Western City? Another area of concern that's been raised with me is the safety of residents and workers living and working near the airport. Members will recall the plane crash just outside Essendon Airport last year, where 4 American tourists and the pilot Max Quartermain died. It crashed into a direct factory outlet warehouse building in close proximity to the airport. It was incredibly lucky that no one on the ground also died in this tragic accident. State and local authorities originally expressed concern with the proposal to build this shopping centre so close to the airport. However, their concerns were ignored. Now it seems that airports are being considered as business destinations in their own right, and commercial precincts with thousands of workers right next door to the airport and the runways are the goal. I hope that the interests of developers and other commercial interests have not been given higher priority than the safety considerations of local workers and residents. According to this bill, the Aerotropolis is intended to create active, vibrant and sustainable communities and locations that support and benefit from the development of the Western Sydney Airport. Well, let's remember that not all Western Sydney residents support the building of the airport, Mr Deputy President. For example, people have welcomed, or there are some good things, people have welcomed the vision for a Western Sydney fresh food precinct in a KPMG report released in November last year in conjunction with New South Wales Farmers Association. The report talks up the potential of a fresh food precinct in Western Sydney, potentially as part of the Aerotropolis precinct, which could create 12,000 jobs in a world-leading food hub. This would be something we are well and truly worth supporting. However, I've spoken with members of the community who are extremely sceptical that they will ever experience any benefits from the Western Sydney Airport. I had a tour of the parameters of the Badgerys Creek Airport site a few weeks ago. While there, I heard from a representative of the Luddenham Progress Association about how the small Luddenham community, which is the closest village to the proposed airport site, are all still on a septic system. The village of Luddenham has been asking for connection to town water and sewerage for many years. They are certainly hoping that all the excitement and promises linked to the Western Sydney Aerotropolis will mean the basics of sewerage and town water for them. I'm also hearing that many in the Luddenham community feel like they are being ignored. I've heard there's been a lack of consultation with the community and that some people feel they haven't received a fair valuation for their land. I've heard the story of one family who have been told they need to vacate by the end of October, yet they still haven't got an agreed payout figure. What has been offered is a pittance to what they believe the land is worth, and no doubt this is not an isolated story. Not long. Considering Luddenham is the closest town to the Aerotropolis, I would hope that the object of the Act to encourage economic growth and development of the Aerotropolis and the rest of the Western City extends to the community on its doorstep. Finally, Clause 8 of the bill establishes a board of the authority which will consist of 7 members appointed by the Minister. 3 of the members are to be nominated for appointment by the relevant Commonwealth Minister, and the appointment of the chairperson of the board will require the concurrence of the Commonwealth Minister. I'll be moving an amendment to ensure a majority of the people on the board reside in the Western City, and I'll speak more to that amendment during the committee stage.
The parliamentary